Okay, so we are at Yud Gimel Amud Beis, the two dots with Prakim Shoel. But before we get to that, just thought I would mention a couple of things that we missed yesterday. Number one, we mentioned the Praktan at the end, which, as we pointed out, Rashi said it meant somebody that was lying on their back with their face up, which is, of course, how ultimately we are buried. But while we are alive, we're not meant to sleep that way. So Rashi says that the reason for that is because the Ganai, somebody's going to be sleeping on parkite, Shema Yiskasha Evari B'Sech Shinasai, V'nira L'Rab V'hu Derech Ganai. But many of the Mepharshim point out, the Rashi, the Ritz for others, that parkite could also be someone who's sleeping on his face, in which case then somebody would essentially be putting himself into a place where he could be miskasha, and that would be considered much more adas, and that would therefore be a problem. The the reality is that the Gemara seems to suggest that one way to avoid this problem is if somebody's going to lean a little bit on the side. Either way, however they're lying, maybe they're going to lean a little bit to the side. So the Gemara says, no, that doesn't work. That only works in terms of sleeping. In terms of sleeping, you're allowed to lean a little bit on the side, but not in terms of Shema. Rabbi Yochanan used to say to Shema, "By doing that?" The Gemara says, no, Rabbi Yochanan was a Baal Basar. Rabbi Yochanan was a corpulent person, and so therefore he had a heter, because otherwise it was too much of a tircha for him. But if you remember, we just had a Gemara on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. The Gemara said in the middle of the way down to two dots, said Tana Rabbanan B'Yisrael Omer, Oimdim V'Karen, Yeshivim V'Karen, Umatin V'Karen. Right, one of the things was you lean on the side and you can say the Shema. So we're just saying that leaning is not allowed, and we saw that leaning is allowed. More than that, later on, the Gemara is going to tell us on Chav Daled, the Gemara tells us on Chavdal, the wide lines, Meis ve'shnayim sheyeshenim b'mita achas. Two people are sleeping in one bed. Zem machzer pana v'kayre, zem machzer pana v'kayre. So this one turns their face that way. That one turns their face this way, and they can read the Shema. So it sounds like they're leaning, essentially a little bit in the bed, not looking at each other. They're not dressed. So that's how they do it. So what are we saying over here that if you lean to the side, it's not okay? Only for Rabbi Yochanan because he was very corpulent, but otherwise not okay. So the Beis Yosef discusses these questions, and he says maybe the Gemara about on Yud Aleph about Matan v'Keren that we just said maybe that meant while you were sitting and not actually lying down. Maybe that's a possibility, and also that he suggests that maybe the situation over here, in the case of the bed, where people weren't dressed, maybe it was too much of a tircha to get out of bed. But in general, the Gemara seems to be suggesting is that if it's not such a tircha, then a person shouldn't be simply leaning a little bit to the side and saying the Shema, which would then come out that much more like the Meiri in terms of the appropriate way to say the Shema is on the bed. Yes, maybe you have to say the Shema on the bed, but a person should. The Meiri had said, "Krishma alamita is lifnei mitase." Like you shouldn't be sitting literally on the bed. You should be doing it right before you get to the bed, so you can still have kavana. But that's the ideal way to say Krishma alamita is to be sitting up, to be doing in an appropriate fashion, not simply like you're lying back and you lean a little bit to say the Shema. Like that's only if it's a tirfa. Okay, that was one point I wanted to mention. The second point I wanted to mention was also an unbelievable Rashba, which comes out like for practical nafkunas halacha. If you recall, the Mishnah told us in the beginning here of the parak, somebody was in the middle of reading, Vigias mana mikra, and then it came time to say the Shema. The Gemara said, Shema mina mitzvah strichas kavan. That was the first line of the Gemara here in the second parak. And the Gemara said, no, it doesn't mean that he had kavana to be yaitz at a mitzvah shema. He had kavana to read. What do you mean? He was already reading. And the Gemara says he was being kari lahagia. He wasn't actually reading to be in a normal way. As Teres pointed out, he was reading to be magia sefer Torah. So you read kichsava. You're just reading the words along with the way it's written. So there are many words. You have kriying sivs, for example. You have situations where the Torah is written in a way that we don't actually pronounce. The words are not written the way they are Oh, the words are not pronounced the way they are written. So we're talking about a situation like that where somebody's just reading in order to understand if it's written correctly. And in that situation, so now he has to, that's the kind of reading that the guy was doing. So when we say that kind of reading is not sufficient, he has to mechaven liba, he has to actually read it the right way and not read it just simply the way it's written. Then he could be yaitz. He doesn't have to have kavana to be mekayim in the midst of Shema. That was the Gemara on Yud Gimel, the first Gemara. Says the Rashba. You recall now we had these machlekes and how much you have to have kavana for Shema. Is it the first parak? Is it the first few words? Is it the first two psukim, like Taisa said, until Shema Be'ahafta? And then we had the position of Rabbi Meir. The position of Rabbi Meir was Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad Ad Kan Tzrichas Kavanas Halev. That's all you have to have kavana for. And then the Gemara said, Amar Rabbi Halacha Rabbi Meir. And Taisus pointed out that Rabba is the Basra, so therefore we go with Rabba. He's the latter opinion, so we pass him like Rabba. Why did Taisus have to point that out? I think Taisus had to point that out because normally we don't pass like Rabbi Meir against others. But Meir, the Stam Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir, but against others we don't pass like Rabbi Meir. The Gemara Erev Memvav tells Rabbi Meir against Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to have that today. We go with Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbi Meir. So now we're bringing up Rabbi Meir. Some of the halachas like Rabbi Meir. Yeah, so Taisus explains because Rabbi Basra, he looked at all the different opinions and he said like this. Fine. You know why we pass like the Basra, right? This is one of these classic situations where we think that there is a Jewish source to this, but it's actually a Christian source. I think the earliest source of this is a Christian, and I believe that the place that we see it first. I think the place that we see it first is it may be in the Taisus Rid. I think it might be the Taisus Rid. Why is it that we pass like the Basroi? I know we say normally you read a Sadaris, the generation is getting worse. So why do we pass like the Basroi? So we say like the later generations, they see better than the earlier generations because they're like dwarves on the shoulders of giants, right? It's anas agabe anak. This idea that we're a dwarf on the shoulder of a giant is part of now Jewish tradition. We actually think of it as a ancient Jewish tradition, but it's not. I believe it actually comes from the Christians, and then it comes in. Anyhow, that's beside the point. So says the Rashba, unbelievable line. Says the Rashba, if Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is Ad Kan Tzrichas Kavanas Halev, why didn't the Gemara say Shema Mina Mitzvah Tzrichas Kavana? Why don't we say that? We learned out that at least the first pasuk requires kavana. And it was a good question. Says the Rashba, because even though we're saying that it's requiring kavana salev, it doesn't mean that if you don't have kavana, that you're not going to be yaitz to the mitzvah. Even if you don't have kavana, of course, the chatzchil, you have to have kavana for it. At least then that first pasuk. But the reality is, if you don't have kavana, it's not going to prevent you from being able to be yaitz to the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema.
Require to be required.
Yeah.
Using that word required.
Yeah, so we're saying we require l'chatchila. It says, listen to the Shulchan Aruch. It says the Shulchan Aruch here. We're in Samach Gimel Halacha Dalet. Ikar kavanah hu pasuk rishon. The main kavanah that one has to have in Shema is the first pasuk of Shema. Hilkach and kara v'loy kivin libay. If you read the first pasuk of Shema, you did not have kavanah. The pasuk rishon lo yatsi dechai basay. Then you're not yatsi yechiel. V'chayzer v'kayrei. Yeah, and you have to go back. Even according to the Manda Amar who holds that mitzvahs do not require kavana, nevertheless still holds that you have to have kavana over here. All right, so that's very fascinating because that's again, it's what the Rashba pointed out. The Rashba points out, and I think very, very obviously so, that if the Gemara is not pointing out that mitzvah has kavana from here, then you actually don't require kavana. So then why is it that you're not yet to the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema if you say the first pasuk without kavana? Nevertheless, that is how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. We can't get more into this again now, but the first pasuk requires kavana, but you cannot learn out of it the mitzvah shrichas kavana. Even those who hold mitzvahs and shrichas kavana still hold that by the first pasuk of Kriyat Shema, one has to nevertheless still be concentrating. Okay, now we are up to the two dots. The two dots of Beprakim Shoel. Right, we are about 5-6 lines from the bottom on your Gimel Amud base. Says the Gemara, Beprakim Shoel. Remember the machlekes that we have between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, right? Rabbi Meir holds that that Yishob that covered Umeshiv, and that is by Beprakim, and Be'emtza Parak Yishob Yira Umeshiv. And Rabbi Yehuda disagreed. Rabbi Yehuda holds that Be'emtza Parak Yishob Yira Umeshiv covered. And Beprakim Yishob Hakavid Umeshiv Shalom L'Chol Adam. That was the machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Now, as I said before, when we have machlokes of Meir Rabbi Yehuda, who do you go like? Of course, Rabbi Yehuda, not like Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara wants to just understand what exactly is this machlokes, because it sounds like a little odd. Says the Gemara, Meishav Machmas Mai. What are you talking about when Rabbi Meir said that a Prakim Yishob Hakavid Umeshiv? Meshiv Machmas Mai, says the Gemara. Who are you being Meshiv to? When somebody says Shalom to you, right? You're allowed to go say Shalom to somebody who you have to give cover to, and you're able to be Meshiv. Says the Gemara, Meshiv, you're able to return Shalom Machmas Mai for who? For what reason? Elan covered. If you're going to say that the reason is because of covered, so then Hashda Mishal Shol Adur Mibaya. If you're able to be Shalom covered, then of course you can return Shalom to somebody covered. Ela Shalom covered Meshiv Shalom L'Chol Adam. Must be that you're able to be Shalom covered and Meshiv Shalom L'Chol Adam. Meaning that when somebody comes by who I have to give cover to, then you can say Shalom to him Beprakim. And if he gave Shalom, if anybody comes over to you and says Shalom to you, then you're able to respond. So, okay, what does that sound like? Rabbi Yehuda. What about the Seifa of Rabbi Meir? And the Emtza of the Shema, of the Brachot Shema, if somebody comes to you who you have to fear, so show him there. You're able to say Shalom to him first if you fear him. Again, we have the Machlokes Rashi, the Ritva, others, right, to explain. It doesn't mean you're actually fearing for your life, but rather fearing because it's your father, it's your Rebbe, or the way the Rashash wants to answer for Rashi. You don't have to fear the person going to kill you. You have to fear the person because he has the power to kill you. He's not going to kill you if you don't say hello to him. So either way, so the answer show him the Yira Meshiv. Meshiv Machmas Mai. In the middle of a parak, when somebody comes to you and saying Shalom to you, and because of Yira, you have to respond to him. So very nice. I understand. I'm sorry that they're able to initiate a Shalom to somebody you have to have Yira for. But it says in Meshiv, you're allowed to respond to somebody who you have Yira for, who said Shalom to you already. So Meshiv Machmas Mai. If you're allowed to say Shalom to somebody who you fear, then of course you can respond to somebody who you fear. So what's the chiddush? So elam ne'akaven. You must say that what it means is that Yishalom be'emtza parak is Yishalom ne'ayira. When somebody you fear, you're able to say Shalom to them first. Umeshim ne'akaven. If somebody who you don't fear, but giving you Shalom first, then you're able to respond to them. So how did Rabbi Yehuda? So then the same is literally the exact sheet as Rabbi Yehuda. There's no difference then between the positions of Rabbi Meir and the position of Rabbi Yehuda. It's the same. It's identical. The Tanah, what do we learn in the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda holds that in the middle of a parak, you're able to say Shalom to somebody who you fear, and you're able to respond to somebody you have to have cover for. And then in between the different parshias, then you're able to say Shalom to somebody you have to have covered for, and if anybody comes by to you and says Shalom to you first, you're allowed to respond. So what's the difference between Shita Meir and Yehuda? Says the Gemara, something is missing in the Mishnah. And is an amazing tool that the rabbis use when you have such a fantastic question that it simply is not understandable. We have to understand more about Chesir Mechsa, and unfortunately, we don't have the time allotted right now to be able to do so. But it is a powerful tool that essentially adds in something to the Mishnah, because fundamentally the Mishnah is not understandable. It's not that the rabbi said adding something else in. The Mishnah is simply not understandable. What is the dispute between Meir and Rabbi Yehuda that the Mishnah is bringing down if they're literally saying the same exact thing? Just doesn't make any sense. So therefore, it can't be saying the same thing. There had to have been something missing from the understanding of what Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir are disputing, and we are going to add it here. And effectively, what are we adding? It's like this. This is what it actually was trying to say. Miprakim, Shem covered. What Rabbi Meir was saying was that the prakim in between the different parshas of Shema and the brachas, Shem covered ain't sarach loy mashu meishev. Right, you have to add in those words that you're able to be shown covered by the prakim, And you don't have to say that you're able to be Meshiv. Of course you're able to be Meshiv. And in the middle of a parak, you're able to be Shom Ne'ayira, and you don't have to say that, of course, you can be Meshiv Ne'ayira. Obviously, you're allowed to. So the position of Rav Meir is that Be'emtza Parak Yishom Ne'ayira Umeshiv, but you don't have to say that because obviously you're able to be Meshiv. And Be'prakim, you're able to be Shom Ne'akavet, and obviously you're able to be Meshiv as well. So you end up having Machlekes because according to Rabbi Yehuda, Be'emtza Parak Yishom Ne'akavet, Mishom Ne'ayira, sorry, Umeshiv Ne'akavet, and Be'prakim Yishom Ne'ayira. And Be'prakim Yishom Ne'akavet Umeshiv Shalom L'chol Adam. So this is how the machlokes ends up coming out to be. So we're not actually changing the position of Rabbi Meir. We're just simply changing the words of what Rabbi Meir said. Instead of saying umeshiv, we have to say, of course you meshiv. Rabbi Yehuda v'emtza shalom ne'ayira umeshiv ne'akavet. According to Rabbi Yehuda v'emtza perek yishom ne'ayira and umeshiv ne'akavet. We're now on the top of your dalet. V'prakim shalom ne'akavet umeshiv shalom l'chol adam. And v'prakim yishom ne'akavet, and you're able to say shalom to everybody who said shalom to you first. Before we move on back to the Tesis, we'll first just finish the Gemara. Gemara brings a raya to this. Tanya Amihachi, if a price that's similar to this. If somebody is in the middle of saying the Shema and his Rebbe or somebody we have to respect comes by him, so Biprakim, if he's between the parashas of Shema, so Shalom Le'akavet. So then he has to say Shalom Le'akavet to them first. Then you don't have to say that he's able to be Meshiv if they say Shalom to him first. And if he's in the middle of the parasha of Shema, then he's only able to say Shalom if he's in fear of these people. And of course, you don't have to say he's able to be Meshiv if these people say Lord him first. Rabbi Yehuda holds no. In the middle of the parak, you're able to say Shalom to anybody you're fearful of, and you can respond to anybody you have to give cover to. And between a parak, you're able to say shalom to even people you have to have covered for. And if somebody who you don't have to have covered for says shalom to you, of course you can respond to them. That is the Gemara over here. It says Taisus, important Taisus, halacha l'maisa Taisus. The bottom Taisus under the Gimel and base. Shalom ne'ayira. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, halacha Rabbi Yehuda. When you have a machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, obviously the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, as we said. The Gemara at Erev Memba says the Gemara. So if the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar feel be'emtza meshim ne'akavet, who holds that even in the middle of a parak you're able to say Shalom Aleichem back to somebody you have to have covered for. Same kain nira shemuter la'anis kaddish ukdusha be'emtza kriyashma. So then if somebody's in the middle of saying kriyashma, he should be able to say kaddish and kedusha. Why? The ein lechamim ne'akavet gadol mizeh. Because if you have to show covet to a human being, what about God? There's nobody you have more required to give covet to than the Rebbeinu Shalom. And if people are saying Kaddish, if they're saying Kedusha at that time, then obviously you should be able to interrupt the Shema to say Kaddish and Kedusha in the middle of the Shema, right? Because that's the greatest example of somebody of an entity that one has to give covet for, that one has to be fearful for. Nevertheless, says Taisus, even though I think saying that during the Shema you have to be able to stop to say Kaddish and Kedusha, Taisus says, nevertheless, but during Shemona Esrei, you're not allowed to stop the Shemona Esrei to say Kaddish and Kedusha. Why? The Mashal Kaman Beperkin later on. I'm sorry, the Mashal Kaman Beperkin, and then later on we're going to have and Lama Aleph, we're going to say the Begul Tila Ein Lanis, that between Gal Yisrael and Shemon Esrei, one's not able to be mafsek at all. So the Kosh came with Tefillah Asma. If you can't be mafsek between Gal Yisrael and Shemon Esrei, then of course during Shemon Esrei itself you shouldn't be mafsek. And now, so that's clear. So during Shemon Esrei, your Davi Shemon Esrei, you shouldn't be mafsek for Kaddish and Kedusha. Meaning you're in one place, they're in another place. You're not supposed to be mafsek. We will eventually see that if you Davi Shemon Esrei with the Tzibur and they're saying Kedusha, and you're up to Kedusha, then of course you could read the Shema and say with them at the same time. They're saying Kedusha, you're saying Kedusha, so that's not a problem. We're talking about a different situation. Let's say somebody's having a long Shema Esrei, and the Tzibur is already going, and he's up to V'lam al Shinit, and they're saying Kedusha. At that point, you don't say Kedusha with them. You just stop. You don't say Kedusha. Right? We're not being mafsek during the Shema Esrei, but during the Shema, says Taisvis, you should be able to be mafsek. If you're in the middle of saying Shema and they're saying Kedusha, you should say Kedusha with them. This is what Taisus is saying. Yes. We wouldn't, according to Taisus, that's what you do. Yes. So let's just finish because there's another very relevant point. Says Taisus. The Bengal is feeling last. The Koshim is feeling Mishem is Levadai. Somebody who's praying on their own. The Shliachtiv of Magiel of Maidim. Somebody's in the middle of davening on their own. And the Shliachtiv is now at Maidim. So Yishra Lemaidim, Avallah Yom Maidim. And he should bow also for Maidim, but he shouldn't say Maidim. But only Vidavka says Shahaya Be'emtza Bracha. But only if he's in the middle of a bracha of Shemana Esrei, not in the end. I'll say bracha loy. Then it will be mashma that he's bowing down for the bracha. We've already said that. Meaning the ein l'krei b'chol bracha celebration should take necham. We're not allowed to bow down except for the 4 times Shemana Esrei. So again, let's say you're in the middle of a situation. You're up to V'lam al Shinim. The Chazin's up to Maidim. So you're in the middle saying V'lam al Shinim al Ti Sikva. The Chazin says Maidim and Achalach. You bow. You don't say Maidim. Right? You're not interrupting Shemana Esrei for anything. Shemana Esrei you don't interrupt for Kaddish Kedusha for nothing. Right? But you could bow for Maidim, says Taisus. But only if you're not up to Baruch Atah Hashem, Shev Erev Machne Zaydim. If you're up to that Baruch, then you can't bow. Because the Gemara is very clear, you're only allowed to bow for us, to get the kings of whatever. Just for us, you're only able to bow out 4 times Shemana Esrei. So if you're up to the Baruch, then do not bow, because that's mashma, you're adding in another time to the Shemana Esrei, which you're not allowed to do. Continues Taisus. This is again one of these historical ephemera that you get from reading various, Chuvas, Rishad, Machon, and Taisus. You see all the places, and you learn a little bit about the life of them. Rabbeinu Tam was rugil. He was normal. It was regular for him. Rugil, regular. Here the English and the Hebrew sound similar. He was regular. What was Rabbeinu Tam regular to do? He would wait by Isafela. What's Isafela? Right? So before you got to the Gula where you're not able to be mafsik, he would stop, meaning the tzibur wasn't waiting for him. Chaz v'shalom, Rabbeinu Tam came late to shul. The tzibur wasn't waiting for him. They're in the middle of Shemana Esrei. He is saying Shema. Again, how that situation happened, I don't know. But Ragil, this was normal for Rabbeinu Tam. So what would he do? He would wait by Shira Chadasha, Kidelanis Kaddish Kedusha Matzibur. So that, remember, the Tzibur is up to Hech Shemana Esrei. They're doing Chazar Hashat. He would wait until they got there in order to be able to say Kaddish Kedusha with the Tzibur, because once he got to Gal Yisrael, he couldn't. And during Shemana Esrei, you can't interrupt, so he would wait. Unbelievably, he would wait, even if it was a long time, even if they could finish the whole thing. He would wait, nevertheless, to be able to get Kaddish Kedusha with the Tzibor, and then he would say his own Shemana Esrei. Okay. Clear? Good. Says the Gemara, we are now on Yudal Amud Aleph. Boy minei Achi Tana Devei Rabbi Chia. Right? Achi, that was his name, says Rashi. Echi v'roish, bupim v'chupim v'ord. I'm not sure if you pronounce it Echi, right? Echi was one of the sons of Binyamin. Maybe that was his name, Echi. Maybe that's where he got it from. He was the Tana Devei Rabbi Chia, right? Remember, we had a Gemara before. Where was the Gemara? Anybody remember? The Gemara told us about. The Gemara told us on Hey Amanaf, the last line. Tani Tana Kamed Rabbi Yochanan. I pointed out to you that Tanaim were literally repeaters. They knew these Mishnayos, they had Masura in their head, they had great memories, they had little photo banks, and they were repeaters. So here we have a guy, we're going to learn about 2 different Tanaim today. They're not Tanas, they're actually in the time that Meroim, but they were Tanas in terms of their job. They were repeaters. They remembered all the different laws, and they would say it over, and then the Rashivas would explain them and debate them, point out what their meanings were. So, So Echi was the Tana in the school of Rabbi Chia, asked Rabbi Chia, the Hallel Megillah Ma'u Sheyafsik. What about when it comes to Hallel and the Megillah? Are you able to be mafsik? So the Ritva explains that we're asking what it means to be mafsik. We're talking about, the Rashi says L'She'el Shalom, but the Ritva points out, we mean it in the same way, in the same styles, like, in the beginning, in the middle of a parak, at the end of a parak, like, that's what we're talking about, the same kind of a shayla. He's asking, what about by Hallel and Megillah? Are you able to have sukkahs be'emtza parak or bein haprakim? Are you able to do the same thing or not? So on the one hand, Umi Amrina, right? Do we say Kal v'chomer kriyash shema d'oraisa posek hal d'rabbanan mibaya? Do we say, look, obviously, if kriyash shema is d'oraisa, and we're telling you able to be mafsek beprakim beemtza, different reasons, then of course Megillah hal this is d'rabbanan obviously can be posek on the one hand. Oidilma pursume nisa adif, or maybe this pursume nisa aspect when the pursume nisa is going to trump, maybe that would trump over even a d'oraisa like shema. What does it mean pursume nisa? By Megillah, I know what the pursume nisa is. Right? I mean, what's the pursuing Nisa and Rosh Chodesh? Right? I understand if you want to say that it's dealing with the days of the Yom Tovim, the Halos pursuing Nisa. Rosh Chodesh, what's the pursuing Nisa? I'm not sure. But in any event, the Gemara is saying you have two possibilities. On the one hand, you could think maybe it's the Raisa, Shema, and Yel to Mafsik, so for sure, but the Rabbanan and Hal Megillah. On the other hand, maybe Hal Megillah have a pursuing Nisa aspect, when that pursuing Nisa is going to trump over the over what the Shema would do, and you wouldn't be able to Mafsik. Says Rabbi Chia, Amalei Pais Gem Kachlom. You're able to Mafsik. It's not a question. You can be Mafsik during Hal on the Megillah, and it's not a problem. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Let's explain. Amar Rabba, Yom Shayachid Gomer Behenas Halal, on the days when the Yachid is going to finish the Halal. Every word there could be darshan. What do you mean a Yachid? Why specifically a Yachid? Okay, we have to talk about that another time. Maybe we'll see it in Taisus. And what does it mean, Gomer Halal? You know that there's many times we say Halal during the year, but we don't always finish the Halal. The Gemara in Erechin tells us that there's 18 days in Eretz Yisrael and they finish the Halal, and 21 days of Chutzlar that they finish the Halal. What are the days? Right, it's the 8 days of Hanukkah, right? The 8 days of Sukkot, right? That's 16. You have 2 days of Pesach. You have 2 days of Pesach. That gets us to what? 20. That's 18, huh? 18, right? Yeah, but you're going to be confused in the math. 8 days of Sukkot. That's 8. 8 days of Hanukkah is 16. Yes, 1 day of Pesach and 1 day of Shavuos. That's 18. And for Chutzlar, you have to add in the second days of the Yom Tov, right? So that's how you get to 21. So according to this halacha that Rabbah is telling us, on the days when a yachid is being given a halal, bein perek leperek pesek, between the prakim of the halal, he's able to be mafsik again and say the shalom, etc., to somebody who he has to give cover to, and anybody who says shalom to him, he can respond to. The emtza is the old from the Ritva. The emtza parak, in the middle of the parak, ain't a paisik. Then he's not stopping. Right? Unless it's a situation of obviously a yira, etc. The emtza parak ain't a paisik. But the yom she'ena yachid gamer venas. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Yom she'yachid gamer venas halal ben parak leparak paisik. On the days when a yachid is finishing the halal, so ben parak leparak, he's going to be paisik. Between the parak, he's able to be paisik, but emtza parak ain't a paisik. Then in the middle of the parak, he can't be paisik at all. But yom she'ena yachid gamer venas halal, but he's not finishing in the halal, meaning on the days when you just say half halal, what we call half halal, because he's skipping out and hafti. So then I feel emtza parak paisik. Then even in the middle of the parak, he's able to be paisik. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Amy, is that correct? V'ha Rav bar Shva ikol l'gabi Ravina. There was a rabbi named Rav bar Shva who came to Ravina. V'yom she'en yachid gamer ben asahal. It was the days that he wasn't finishing the halal, and the Ritva says he probably was doing it b'yechidus because it sounds like he came to his house. V'loi pasik led. He didn't stop for him while he was in the middle of saying, and it was a hot day. You didn't have to finish the halal. So it says the Gemara, Shani Rav Bashvad le'chashiv le'ad Ravina. Rav Bashvad wasn't very important to Ravina, that's why he didn't stop. But don't learn anything out from it. So it comes out, according to this Gemara, that the way Rav is saying it is that it depends if it's a day that you finish the halal or not. If it's a day that you finish the halal, so you can be masik ben parak leparak, but not be'emtza a parak. But if it's the day that you don't finish the halal, it's a day that you just say half halal, so then you're able to be masik even be'emtza a parak for somebody to say shalom to them. That is the Gemara. We have a few minutes more, so I just want to do the giant Taisus here. We can't do the whole thing, but I do want to point out a couple of bits from the Taisus. The Taisus are not relevant so much for this Gemara, for the general Gemara, but for this Gemara about how learning a little bit about it is as follows. So Taisus, I'm about in the narrow lines, about halfway in the narrow lines of the big Taisus. The Taisus says, "Umasha anu aimrim aisai." Hainu mishur minig. The reason that we say the halal, the half halal, is because of the fact that we do it as a minig. Again, I can't get into all the other Gemara is basing himself on, but that's what Taisa says. Because of Maksavitri, the Rizbah quotes this in the name of Rashi's school, but the Maksavitri is a Talmud of Rashi. So you want to suggest on a day that you say only half halal, that you don't actually make a bracha. When you say half halal, you shouldn't make a bracha before halal. Only on the days you say a full halal. That's what it says in the Maksavitri. And the aim of Varchan al Darshu Minik, because you don't make a bracha on Minhagim. Mihu, I'm Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam disagrees. I'm skipping a few lines. Rabbeinu Tam says it's not true. Why? Dachazina kol yontav sheni ene ela minhaga umavarchinan. Right? You make a bracha on yontav sheni. We make a kiddush and we make all these things, right? And that's only minik, right? That's the Gemara in Bay on Daf Dalan Beis. You're only doing yontav sheni because of minhagim, and nevertheless, you see, you still make brachas. So don't say, says Taisvis, that when you do something because of a minig, you don't say a bracha. You do say a bracha. You do make a bracha on something that's a minig. And Taisa is an unbelievable raya. What's Taisa's raya? The Eloi mevarchen my hafsaka shayach ba. If you didn't make a bracha before this halal, half halal, that you're saying it's just a minig, then what would be the question of being mafsik? What are you being mafsik from? You're just saying psukim. Where does this sugya come up? Halal Yom Atmut, Halal Yom Mishlam. That's not a joke. This is the massive sugya for that, right? Because those that say, okay, I'm going to say Halal out of bracha, that's not exciting. Only if you're going to say Halal with a bracha is when you're making something that's going to be relevant. Otherwise, you're just saying psukim, right? Makes sense. That's Taisus is saying over here, and then Taisus says, "I'll bring you a raya." Then you make brachas on minhagim. I'm skipping a little bit down to the end of the narrow lines. Taisus goes from the Sar Mikoitzi, right? Remember, we already discussed the Sar Mikoitzi, why it was called the Sar, right? We already explained before. So what does the Sar Mikoitzi say? It says, the Kevin Sharotz L'chayiv Atzmai Mevarach Me'inze Bracha L'Vatola Midi the Hav Alul V'Tfilin the Hani Nashim Mevarches Afagav She'en Chayavos. Women, if they want to make a bracha on the lulav, the tefillin, I don't want to get into that's exciting, but that's for another time. They're able to make brachas on mitzvahs that I'm a for. So this is a big difference between Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. But for Ashkenazim, women who are not machuyah mitzvahs, the seisha is not going, but they take it on, they want to make a bracha, and nevertheless they're allowed to make a bracha. This is the Sami Kaitzi. So what we're saying is that we have a situation, we have a minhag, and what is the halacha? The halacha is it's 100% able to make a bracha even on a minhag. So a day when you're saying half halal, that according to what Tais is saying, just saying it as a minhag, we're not going to say like the Maksavitri that you wouldn't say a bracha on it. You will say a bracha on the halal. Okay. Continues the Gemara. We are now to Tudat. Boy minei Asiyon, Tana de Rav Ami. So we meet somebody else who is the Tana in the Rav Ami school. So he asked Rav Ami a question. What did he ask me, Rav Ami? I'll show you if somebody is in the middle of tinus, is he able to taste? Right? So the Gemara says, he accepted upon himself not to do achil and shia. The halakha, he's not eating or drinking, he's just tasting. Or maybe he accepted upon himself not to have anon, he's having enough from the tasting. Rav Ami says you're able to taste it, and it's not a problem at all. Tanya Namihachi, you have a brayso like this as well. Eina to una bracha, somebody who's tasting, it doesn't require to make a bracha. And somebody who's shari in tainus is able to taste, and it's not a problem at all. Ad kama, how much is he allowed to taste? Your reviews. So he's able to taste up until a reviews. Now, until you get excited and be like, oh, I'm able to taste on a tainus. No, look at tainus, not so exciting. So it says, what kind of a fast are we talking about? Look at the Gemara said, if he's makabel on himself or he's not makabel on himself. Hi, Lishna says Taisus, Mashma demari b'tainus yachet shekibo olav aval b'tainus hakos. Lloyd, any tainus that's written in the Torah, meaning the 4 tainusim that's mentioned in the Torah, obviously we're not talking about that because then you're not makabel on yourself. The Torah said you have to fast. So we're only talking about a tainus yachet, right? A tainus yachet that you accept upon yourself a special fast, tainus chaloim or whatever it is. So in such a situation, person is able to fast and taste. But in a regular situation, Shivas B'Tammuz, Asar B'Tevis, no tasting on those days. Okay.
Tasting implies swallowing.
Fantastic. Stole out of my mind. So out of Taisus. The next Taisus. Look at the second to bottom Taisus. Toyim ve'emekach klum pirish rach. Taisus go to Rabbeinu Chananel. Then what do we? And if you look at the Rabbeinu Chananel, is there as well. The Rabbeinu Chananel says kigon shechazer poltoi, that you spit it out. The lechash anom in tiimo v'gam in tzarich bracha, that you are not going to have any hanot from that kind of a taste and doesn't require a bracha. So and Taisus quotes that down as a halacha that we're talking about a situation of somebody who is not swallowing. If he's not swallowing, then he's just that literally considering tasting, and that's okay. I once heard a woman who was a wine taster from woman who was a wine taster for her business. That's what she was. And the answer was how she was able to be a wine taster was because by definition, these wine tasters, they don't swallow. They spit out.
Brushing teeth and tennis. This is the proof.
The brushing teeth on the times, this is the proof because what? You're not swallowing the water. Right. Okay. I don't know. All right, moving on. We are at the two dots here. Amar Rav. Somebody who gives a shalom to the friend before they daven, it's like they're making a bama. What do you mean like making a bama? Remember, we already said that you're not supposed to be doing things before you daven. Remember the Gemara we had before? When did we have that Gemara? The Gemara said in Yudam Beis, right? Don't eat before you daven for your survival. So Rav is saying, don't go around giving shalom aleichem to people before you daven. Why? It's like you're making a bummer. What do you mean? Hashem Navi Yeshaya says, stop dealing with the people who have souls in their noses. How are they so important to you? Meaning, I'm important to you, says God, not the people who have souls. I'll take you bameh el bama. Don't read the word bameh. Read it as bama. Fine. Shmuel Amar bameh. Shmuel doesn't read it as bama. He reads it as bameh. How could you respect and spend all this time on people and not respect the time of and spend the time on me? That's what Rebbeinu Shalom is asking. So you don't say shalom aleichem to people before you daven. So says the Gemara, what do you mean? Must have Rav Sheshes ask a kasha. We just said b'prakim shalom ne'akavnu meishiv. You just said that between the prakim, you're able to say shalom aleichem and you're able to be meishiv shalom b'chol adam. So what are you talking about? You're able to say, and you didn't have a Shemana Esrei yet, and you say you're able to interrupt the Shema to say shalom. So what do you mean? So says the Gemara, what we're talking about when we say it's not mutter to go around saying shalom is don't go knocking on people's doors, say hey, how you doing? No, but obviously in shul or whatever, somebody is said shalom to you. It's a different story. We're talking about don't go around glad handing. In those days, they used to have vekkers. They would knock on the windows of the houses in the morning to get people up for shul. That's not mashkim lepiska. That's an v'isr. That's getting somebody for shul. That's obviously okay. But going to shul to somebody before you daven, that's where it's a problem. We skipped the parentheses. Amar Ravidi bar Avon, Amar Ravitzel bar Sian. Again, the name of Rabbi Sian. A person shouldn't do what he needs to do before he davens. Again, the same idea that we already saw in Yom Beis about not eating before you daven, not going to shmuz before you daven. A person is going to have tzedek before him, and then he will put his feet. The pasuk, right? Pa'amav is the feet. So again, another verse from Ravitha Barasian. Maybe this is a student of this Asin who was the Tana. Maybe that would be the connection of why I bring it down. Also relates to the topic of Kol Maspal V'Chag. Somebody who first davens and then he goes on the road. Hashem is going to help him take care of his stuff. First he was tzedek in front of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and then he put his feet on the ground. Last Gemara, Rabbi Yonah, Rabbi Zera, or Rabbi Zir, depending on the side. I'm sorry, so Shas, etc. Maybe the same person. Not anybody who has 7 days without a dream is considered bad. Somebody who is full, he will sleep and he will not be remembered for bad. What do you mean? I'll take a Saveya, Elo Sheva, read it as 7. So if somebody doesn't have a dream for 7 days, it's considered bad. Somebody who's satisfied himself on Torah and then he's sleeping, they won't give him a besuras ros. In other words, that somebody who is full of learning, Yolan, look at Rashi, somebody who's spending his time learning, Yolan, because if somebody is normally just sleeping 7 days without a dream, it means that Shema is not caring about him, and therefore they're not remembering him. and therefore he's not getting any sort of chalaim. You're looking later on when we get to the ninth parak where it talks about all the different aspects of chalaim. One of them is a bit of a prophecy. So yeah, if somebody is not having any bit of prophecy, it means he's not being thought about. But somebody who's learning, he's being masbi'asim from Torah, and then he's sleeping, so then he won't have any besuras rois. If he doesn't have any dream, he won't be remembered for bad. Have a wonderful day. Have a good chance.